It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kaushalendra Kishore. So Kaushalendra is a research director at CAFRAL. He's a theorist and he's an applied theorist, and his interests include banking, corporate finance, contract theory, and financial crisis. So he's conducted research on how banks manage their risks from an organizational design perspective. And he also looks at reasons for risk management failures. So he has a degree in mechanical engineering from IIT Kanpur, an MPhil from IGIDR, and a PhD in finance from the University of Minnesota. So he'll be presenting today on, he'll be presenting a paper on credit insurance, bailout, and systemic risk. So over to you, Kaushalendra.
Thank you, Sanket, for the generous introduction and for inviting me for this webinar. As Sanket said, I'll be talking about credit insurance, bailout, and systemic risk. So first, the usual disclaimer applies. The views expressed in this paper are mine and do not necessarily reflect the position of RBI or CAFRAL. So the motivation for this paper comes from the global financial crisis. And so just let me recap some of the important events which happened during the crisis. So first, before the crisis, the banks made correlated investments and made large investments in the real estate sector. And they hedged these investments using credit default swap contracts. In particular, there was one firm, AIG, which issued credit default swap contracts on a very large scale. So as of December 2007, AIG had 533 billion in notional amount of credit default swap outstanding. Now, not only did AIG made large insure these real estate investments, it made large investments in the real estate sector as well. So it had $85 billion of real estate investments as of December 2007, which means AIG was not diversifying its risk, and it was also betting heavily on the real estate sector. Finally, when the crisis hit, AIG was bailed out because it was considered a systemically important firm. The bailout was worth $182 billion. But more interestingly, the benefit of the bailout went to the counterparty banks. So these counterparty banks had written credit default swap contracts, and this bailout money was used to pay on those credit default swap contracts. For example, Goldman Sachs received almost $13 billion, Societe Generale received almost $12 billion, and so on. And there is a long list of investment banks and other banks which had made investments in real estate and written contracts with AIG, and they all got paid by this $182 billion bailout. So the question is, how does a too big to fail firm like AIG create systemic risk? Right? We know the usual channels where in presence, under the expectation of a bailout, a bank or a firm may take excessive risk. Or if a firm fails, then because of contagion, the counterparty firms may be affected as well. But in our example, the benefit of the bailout was going to the counterparty banks. So I asked the question as to what was the impact of expectation of the bailout on the investment strategy of the counterparty banks. And the next question is, why did AIG write underpriced insurance contracts? In other words, why did it not have enough money to meet its obligations? Also, why did AIG invest in the real estate sector, the very sector that it was insuring? Because from the perspective of diversification, this does not make any sense that you are investing in the very sector that you are insuring. Because if the sector goes down, then you will be in trouble because your obligations will also be high and your assets will also be performing poorly. And the main result of the paper is that I highlight a new channel by which the presence of a too big to fail institution can create systemic risk. And this channel is basically that the counterparty banks and the insurance firm itself may be making correlated investments ex ante. So this systemic risk is in the ex ante sense that the firms and the banks and the the insurance firms are investing in the same sector. If the sector goes down, then ex post there will be trouble as well. But the systemic risk is getting created ex ante. That is the main contribution. Is somebody asking any question? Hello?
No, it might be background noise. Please go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, so as I said, the presence of one large institution can create systemic risk in the ex-ante sense, which is that the counterparty banks may be making correlated investments ex-ante. And in my model, I'll show that the systemically risky firm will arise endogenously and will be need to be bailed out. So let me give you a summary of the model and the main result. So in my model, the banks choose to invest and choose the correlation of their investments. So in my model, you will either make correlated investments or perfectly uncorrelated investments. After making the investments, the banks write credit default swap contracts with a competitive firm. And the main result is, as I said, is that the banks will make correlated investments ex ante. Secondly, they will only insure for the good aggregate state and they will rely on bailout in the bad aggregate state. So basically, because you have made correlated investments, there will be aggregate risks in the economy. When those investments do well, there will be a good aggregate state. And when those investments do poorly, that will be the bad aggregate state. And within each of these aggregate states, you will have idiosyncratic risks. So what I show is that banks will write insurance contracts only to insure the idiosyncratic risk of the good aggregate state. And they will not insure for the bad aggregate state. In other words, the banks will be writing underpriced insurance contracts. And finally, I will also show that insurance firms will also invest in the same sector as the banks. So what are the policy implications of this model, of this paper? So I show that if you put a cap on the size of the insurance firm, then you can create the prevention of systemic risk. So when you put a cap on the size of insurance firm, there are many insurance firms in the economy, and there is no one systemically important firm which need to be bailed out. I mean, so this is, although this is motivated by the global financial crisis, there might be some long-term policy implications for India as well. Although in my opinion, we are still far from it. So in the Indian context, we are talking about privatization of LIC. And once LIC gets privatized, and if there is a credit insurance market in India, it may happen that like AIG, LIC may write a lot of underpriced contracts. And so the regulator in that case must be vigilant. That LIC does not turn out to be similar to AIG, because AIG also had a large insurance business in its own as well, and their financial security business was a relatively small one, but it took the entire firm down. So now let me give you the intuition for the results. So as I said, the first result is that the banks make correlated investments and write underpriced contracts. So why are they writing? Why are they making correlated investments? As I said, in the bad state, the banks will only insure for the aggregate state. So in the bad aggregate state, insurance firm will be forced to announce bankruptcy because it has collected very less premium and its obligations are very high. In the bad aggregate state, many banks are performing poorly, so the insurance firm needs to pay a lot, but it cannot meet its obligations if the premium it has charged is very low. So as soon as the insurance firm will announce bankruptcy, there will be a run on the counterparty banks. This is what we saw during the global financial crisis as well. Immediately after Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, people came to know that AIG was also probably going to go bankrupt, and there was a huge run on all the counterparty banks, and JP Morgan, AIG, all these banks were facing a run. So what will happen is that in that run, even both the solvent and the insolvent banks may fail, because when they are selling their assets which are not maturing, they may be sold at very low prices during the state of crisis. Now, the key assumption in the model is that the regulator cannot observe the returns of these banks. So in other words, when there is a sharp crisis going on, the regulator does not have the time to understand which banks is doing well and which bank is not doing well. And so it cannot act as the lender of last resort to the solvent banks. Okay, so the only option for the regulator to save the system is to bail out the insurance firm. It cannot choose the solvent banks and use a targeted policy of just lending to the solvent banks and letting the insolvent ones fail. in that panic mode, the regulator has the only one option, which is bail out the insurance firm to save the banks. And because this crisis resolution policy is imperfectly targeted, by imperfectly targeted, I mean the regulator is not distinguishing between banks which are doing well, in other words, which are solvent, and banks which are performing poorly or which are insolvent. So because this crisis resolution policy is imperfectly targeted, everyone wants to get the benefit of the bailout. So any bank whose assets are performing well when the bailout is occurring will not get paid on its credit default swap contract. So it will not get the benefit of the bailout. So ex ante, all banks want to fail, or all banks want their assets to perform poorly exactly at the same time when the bailout is occurring. And so they make correlated investments and they coordinate so that everyone is performing poorly when the bailout is occurring. The next result is that the insurance firm also invests in the same sector. So now why is the insurance firm investing in the same sector? It is investing in the same sector because there is only one scenario where the insurance firm can earn positive profits, which is when the banks are also performing well, which is there is a good aggregate state, and the insurance firm's assets are also performing well. So if both the things are happening, that the insurance firm in the model will earn a positive profit, and it wants to maximize the likelihood that this happens, and so it invests in the same sector that the banks are investing. So think about AIG. If real estate sector had done well, then its obligations would also have been small, and the return on its assets would also have been large. So it would have made really large profits. But if the real estate sector went down, then AIG knew that it would be bailed out, as was the case. So basically, AIG is making large profits in the good state at the cost of the regulator in the bad state. So this is kind of risk shifting, but at the cost of the regulator. So, so that is why AIG makes investment in the same sector as the banks. Next, so let me compare. So my paper is closest to Acharya Yarul major paper on systemic risk. So in their paper, they also talk about too many to fail problem. And they show that regulator in such a case has two policy options. So the first policy option is use an imperfectly targeted policy, which is just bail out all the banks. And they show that this can lead to correlated investments ex ante. So my results are very similar as well. But they show that there is another policy option for the regulator, which is to provide liquidity to the successful banks to buy the failed banks. Now, in this case, the successful banks want to survive so that they are able to buy the failed banks at fire sale prices and make profit on those investments. So ex ante, they make uncorrelated investments. My paper argues why this targeted policy may not be possible when the crisis is occurring and when there is a systemically important firm. So, so I explained why targeted policy cannot be used. And this is happening because the insurance firm creates a wedge between the banks and the regulator. So the regulator does not know when the insurance firm is going bankrupt, which counterparty has what positions and how are those positions performing. So it cannot distinguish between the solvent and the insolvent banks. And so it is forced to use the imperfectly targeted policy of bailing out the insurance firm. And so this leads to the creation of systemic risk. My paper is related to other literature as well. So there is a large literature on systemic risk and too big to fail banks and bailouts. So another closely related paper is Farhi, Tirul, and 2011. In their paper, they show that they argue that when central banks use the lowering of interest rate to save the system, as was the case after the financial crisis, ex ante, this lowering of interest rate can create an incentive to make correlated investments and create systemic risk. And the reason is similar, which is that this lowering of interest rate is an imperfectly targeted policy, and it is not distinguishing between solvent banks and insolvent banks, or in other words, between banks which are doing well and banks which are doing poorly. So my paper is closely related to this paper as well. The main contribution of my paper to this literature is that I show that a systemically large institution can create systemic risk in the ex ante sense because its counterparties could be making correlated investments. So the main idea is that there is a big institution. We know it creates systemic risk, but this is the first paper which points out that this systemic risk can also be created in the ex ante sense because its counterparties could be making correlated investments. Secondly, my paper is related to the counterparty risk literature as well. So usually in the counterparty risk literature, it is the insurer who indulges in moral hazard, which results in creation of counterparty risk. But in my model, the counterparty risk is created because of collective moral hazard problem of the banks. So banks ex ante write cheap contracts with the insurance firm, which is competitive in nature and is forced to write such contracts. So I'll just take a pause and wait if we have any questions before I move to the model and to Greek letters. Are there any questions? Because I don't see anything in the chat box. Okay, there are some questions. So the question is, I think you have assumed investment sector to be competitive, but your results are motivated from AIG being too big to fail. However, if a firm is too big to fail, then the insurance market cannot be competitive. An insurance firm will have positive profit, not necessarily only at good value. Okay, so I think I follow the question. So in my model, I will show that this ex ante the insurance firms are not too big to fail. Okay, the banks make herd together to write an insurance contract with one of the firms. So the insurance market is actually competitive. AIG was big, yes, but all the counterparty banks could have gone to some other insurance firm to also write the insurance contract. So as you will see that although AIG was a big firm to begin with, in my model, the systemically important firm, insurance firm, will arise endogenously. I hope that answers the question. Any other questions?
Dhruv, do you have any follow-up?
No, sir.
Well, you can speak as well.
Yeah, in further model, maybe I can get more clarity.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other.
There's one more.
Yeah.
Since you have, so this question is from Himadri Chakravarti. Since you had an assumption about the regulator not observing the market returns of the banks, how is it relevant to say in the context of India, which has large number of public sector banks? No, okay. So you are asking about the LIC question and when there will be a credit insurance market. See, there are many private sector banks as well. So it is possible that in future, these private sector banks market share has been constantly increasing. So 10 years from now, 20 years from, it is possible that these are the dominant players and maybe having 50, 60, 70% of the market share. So in that case, it is possible that AIG could turn out similar to, LIC could be turning out similar to AIG, and banks like SDFC, ICICI, and other big private sector banks could be writing such contract with LIC or any other insurance firm for that matter.
Maybe another 30 minutes.
Okay, cool. So let me get into the model now. First I'll talk about the model and the model solution. Then I'll talk about the policy implication, which is that having small insurance firm or putting a cap on the size of insurance firm can solve the problem of systemic risk. And then I'll discuss the extension where I'll allow the insurance firm to also invest in one of the industry. And I'll show that the insurance firm will invest in the same industry as the banks. So at t equal to 0, I have two dates, t equal to 0 and t equal to 1. At t equal to 0, the banks borrow and invest in an industry. Then they choose the correlation of their assets with other banks. After making the investments, they write credit defaults of contracts with a competitive firm. At t equal to 1, return R or L is realized. If successful, they continue to operate. And there is a continuation value of the bank, which can be interpreted as charter value as well, which is denoted by V. There is an insurance firm which will either be bailed out or not, depending on what happens at t equal to 1. So basically the banks which are a continuum borrow from depositors, and there is no deposit insurance, and they make investments. The return R, which is greater than or equal to 1, either R is realized, which is the good return, high return, or L equal to 0, which is the low return, is realized. If the banks are successful, then there is a continuation value V. And the technology of investment looks like this. So the investment is risky. So 1 unit, if the banks make 1 unit or investment in an industry, the industry can be either in good state or bad state. So the good state occurs with probability Q. If the good state occurs, then the assets succeed with probability alpha and fail with probability 1 minus alpha. If the bad state occurs, which happens with probability 1 minus Q, then the assets succeed with probability beta and fails with probability 1 minus beta. And because good state is better than the bad state, so the likelihood of success in the good state is more than the likelihood of success in the bad state, which means alpha is assumed to be greater than beta. So basically you can see that there is idiosyncratic risk within both good and bad states. Now, if the banks invest in the same industry, which I denote by rho equal to 1, then there are two aggregate states. There is a good aggregate state and there will be a bad aggregate state, because either the industry is in good state or it is in bad state. But if the banks invest in different industries, which is denoted by rho equal to 0, then there is only one aggregate state. And there will be omega banks which will receive R, and 1 minus omega banks will receive 0. So omega is basically Q times alpha plus 1 minus Q times beta, because fraction Q of the industries will be in good state, and fraction 1 minus Q of the industry will be in bad state, where beta fraction will receive R, and 1 minus beta will receive 0. So now I consider two kinds of maturity in my model. So there's a benchmark case where all the assets mature together at t equal to 1, and because all the assets are maturing together, there is no possibility of run on a solvent banks. In this case, we will see that there will be no creation of systemic risk. But there is a more realistic and the more interesting case where the assets will not mature together. There is asynchronous maturity. And I assume that gamma fraction of the assets, and for simplicity, gamma is assumed to be half. So half of the assets mature at t equal to 1 plus epsilon, and the remaining half mature at t. Now, because the assets are not maturing together, there is a possibility of run on the solvent banks. And because there's a possibility of run on the solvent banks, it can also result in their failure. So just to make things clear again, so at t equal to 1, the successful banks will receive R by 2 because half of the assets mature, and the failed banks will receive 0. And at t equal to 1 plus epsilon, again, the successful banks will receive R by 2 and the failed banks will receive 0. And deposit contract has face value D. As I said, there is no deposit insurance. And for both cases, the contract matures at t equal to 1. This early maturity is a very common assumption because we know that banks create liquid assets. So let me just pause a minute if there are any questions on the model. Okay. And feel free to ask if writing is too much of a trouble as well, if there are any notational questions or any clarification questions. So after making the investments, the banks will write insurance contracts. So there are insurance firms in Bertrand competition. The banks will collectively write contract with one firm. The premium is denoted by Z. And in the benchmark case, I'll assume that the insurance firms only insure the premium. I'll relax this assumption later where I'll allow the insurance firm to make investment in an industry. And in that case, I'll show that insurance firm invest in the same industry as the bank. So now how is the equilibrium defined? So the equilibrium is defined by correlation rho, the face value of deposits D and the premium Z, such that banks choose these parameters rho, D and Z to maximize their profits. And there is participation constraint for both the depositors and the insurance firm. So the expected profit of the depositors is greater than 0. And the expected profit of the insurance firms is also greater than 0. Now to solve the model, we'll do it in 2 steps. The first step will be ex post analysis. So what we'll do is we'll take rho as given, and then we'll solve for the optimal deposit contract and the insurance contract. And then we will solve for the optimal correlation, ex ante correlation that the banks will choose. So there are four ex post scenarios to consider. So these scenarios are basically the most benchmark case, which is where the assets mature together and where the correlation of assets is 0. And when the assets do not mature together and the correlation of assets is again 0. And similarly, when the assets do not mature together and correlation of assets is 1. And when they mature together and the correlation of assets is 1. So we'll analyze these 4 scenarios one by one, and we'll show that the banks will enjoy the maximum profit and there is a bailout when the assets do not mature together and when the correlation of assets is 1. Are there any questions?
No, there's no questions on the chat window.
Okay. Okay. So let me do the ex post analysis for the first case, which is when the assets mature together and the correlation is 0. So this will be our benchmark and the simplest case. So what happens in this case? Because the correlation is 0, what happens? Let's see first what happens without the credit insurance contract. So without the credit insurance contract, what will happen is 1 minus omega banks will fail and they will lose their continuation value. Now the regulator wants to maximize the social surplus and he doesn't want the continuation value to be lost. So the regulator intervenes. And what he does, he sells the failed banks to the successful ones to prevent the loss of continuation value, which means that the successful banks pay something to the regulator to buy the unsuccessful banks. So there is a profit transfer to the regulator without insurance contracts. Now, what the banks can do is they can write insurance contracts with the firm. In this case, when they write insurance contract, there will be no failure and no regulatory intervention. So because there is no regulatory intervention, this prevents profit transfer to the regulator. So what the result which we get is that the banks will write fairly priced insurance contract with premium equal to 1 minus omega r, because 1 minus omega banks are failing and R is the notional value of that. And so its expected profit is equal to omega r minus 1 plus V, where omega r minus 1 is basically the net present value of the investments, and V is the continuation value of the bank if it succeeds. So now why will the banks not write underpriced contracts and rely on bailout in this case? They will not rely on bailout because there will be no bailout. So what will happen if the banks write underpriced contracts is that regulator will let the insurance firm fail and sell the failed banks to the successful banks. Because this is a one-shot game, all the assets are maturing together. The banks which are successful can always buy the unsuccessful banks. So this is a scenario like as if the banks have not written any contract, not written any insurance contracts, and so there will be no bailout as well. Hence the insurance contract is fairly priced. Now let's go to the second case where the assets are not where the banks have made correlated investments. Sorry, where the banks have made uncorrelated investments. So rho is equal to 0, and assets are not maturing together. So as I said, when assets do not mature together, then omega banks will receive R by 2 at t equal to 1. And 1 minus omega banks will receive 0. At t equal to 1 plus epsilon, the remaining the assets mature. So again, the banks with successful assets, these omega banks will again receive R by 2. And the remaining 1 minus omega banks will receive 0. So now let's discuss again what happens without the insurance contract. So without the insurance contract, the depositors do not observe the return, and so there will be a run on the banks. Because these 1 minus omega banks are failing, the depositors do not know which banks are performing well and which are performing poorly. So they will simply run on all the banks. Now what the banks can do is they can sell the assets which are maturing at t equal to 1 plus epsilon to outside investors. So when they are selling these assets to outside investors, the price of the asset will be omega r, because omega fraction of the asset is yielding r and 1 minus omega is yielding 0. So the expected value of the asset is omega r. Now, so the successful banks at t equal to 1 can raise r by 2 from the assets which mature at t equal to 1, and omega r by 2 from the assets that they sell to outside investors. And because omega is large, because the banks have made uncorrelated investments, I assume that the successful banks have enough assets that they do not go bankrupt. This is a parametric assumption. So now we are back to the earlier case where what happens is that the failed banks can be sold to the successful banks by the regulator, and there will be a profit transfer to the regulator, and there will be no bailout. So what is basically happening is whenever there are some solvent banks which are surviving, the regulator always has an option to sell the insolvent banks to the solvent ones. And the banks do not want this to happen ex ante because there is profit transfer to the regulator. So what they will do is they will write insurance contracts which are fairly priced. So so as before, the banks will write fairly priced insurance contract with premium z equal to 1 minus omega r. This is because 1 minus omega banks are failing and r is the notional value of the asset. And again, the expected profit of the banks is omega r minus 1 plus v. So omega r minus 1 is the NPV of the current investment, and v is the continuation value. Again, why will the banks not write underpriced insurance contract? They will not write underpriced insurance contract because there is no bailout. Because if the insurance firm fails, the banks can let them, the regulator can let it fail and sell the failed counterparty banks to the successful counterparty banks. So there will be no bailout of the insurance firm. So I'll pause again if there are any questions. So let me summarize what we have done in this case. We have seen that when the assets do not mature together, and if the banks have made correlated investments, there is no bailout. So now we'll go to the case where banks have made correlated investments and the assets are not maturing together. So as I said, so rho equal to 1, which means the banks have made correlated investments and the assets are not maturing together. So in this case, what will happen is that there will be two aggregate states. There will be good aggregate state if the industry that the banks have invested in is in good state. And there will be a bad aggregate state if the industry that the bank has invested in is in bad aggregate state. And if you recall from the technology, in the good aggregate state, alpha banks will succeed. And the bad aggregate state, beta banks will succeed. And because good state is better than the bad state, more banks will succeed in the good state than the bad state. So alpha is assumed to be greater than beta. Now, the main result here is that in this case, banks will insure only for the good aggregate state. And the premium will take a value of 1 minus alpha R. Why 1 minus alpha R? Because in the good aggregate state, alpha banks are succeeding and 1 minus alpha banks are failing. So 1 minus alpha R will be the premium in the, if you are insuring only for the good aggregate state. And the banks will rely on bailout in the bad aggregate state. So we will show this by guess and verify method. We'll prove this by guess and verify technique. So what happens? So let's consider what happens in the bad state with the low premium 1 minus alpha R. Now, because we are in the bad state, at t equal to 1, beta banks will receive R by 2. Beta is, recall that beta is low because many banks are failing. And so the banks which are doing well are very low. So beta is low. And 1 minus beta banks will receive 0. Again, at t equal to 1 plus epsilon, beta banks will again receive R by 2. These are the successful banks, and 1 minus beta banks will receive 0. Now insurance company owes R by 2 to each of these 1 minus beta banks at t equal to 1. So at t equal to 1, basically, these 1 minus beta banks assets are failing. So they say the insurance firms to pay. And so the beta bank, so the insurance firms is owing R by 2 to each of these 1 minus beta banks. So I assume that eventually, as was the case for AIG, the insurance firm will run out of money if it has written, excuse me, underpriced insurance contracts. So this is what the assumption is. So if the insurance firm runs out of money, it will be forced to announce bankruptcy. So basically, left-hand side is the premium collected by the insurance firm, and right-hand side is the obligation of the insurance firm. So as soon as the insurance firm will announce bankruptcy, the depositors know that the failed banks are insolvent. And so there will be a run on all banks as depositors do not observe the return. So let me recap. At t equal to 1, the insurance firm announces bankruptcy. And the depositors, because they don't know which bank is doing well and which is not, they will run on all the banks. So now what happens if there is a run on all the banks? The banks can sell their assets to outside investors, but now the price is beta times R. Why is the price beta times R? Because beta banks are doing well and 1 minus beta are doing poorly. So the expected value of the asset is beta times R. But recall that beta is low because very few banks are doing well. So this price beta R at which the banks can sell their assets is a low price. Because this is low, it might happen. So the successful banks can raise basically R by 2 from the assets that mature at t equal to 1 and plus beta R by 2 from selling their assets. And because beta is low, this amount will not be enough to meet its obligations. And even the successful banks will go bankrupt. So the assumption is that the amount that the successful banks can raise at t equal to 1 is not enough to meet its obligations. And so even the solvent banks, the successful banks, will go bankrupt. Now, as I said, the regulator cannot observe the returns. So it cannot act as the lender of last resort to the solvent banks. It cannot sell the failed banks to the solvent banks because solvent banks are failing. So the only option for the regulator is to bail out the insurance firm to prevent all the counterparty banks from failing. And so the result is that the banks only insure for the good state and rely on bailout in the bad state. So the risk is underpriced. The equilibrium premium, insurance premium is 1 minus alpha R because 1 minus alpha banks fail in the good aggregate state. And the expected profit of the bank is now higher. It is alpha R minus 1 plus V, and alpha R minus 1 plus minus 1 is greater than the NPV of the investment. The expected profit of the bank is higher because there is a transfer from the regulator in the bad state. Or speaking differently, the banks are completely able to insure themselves even by writing underpriced contracts. So there is no bailout in the good state So premium only prices the good state. And there is a net transfer from regulator in the bad state. And the expected value of the transfer is 1 minus Q times alpha minus beta R. So 1 minus Q is the probability of the occurrence of the bad state. And alpha minus beta R will be the total value of the transfer. So this leads to the main result of the paper, which is that when assets are not maturing together, ex ante, the banks prefer to make correlated investments. And the intuition, as I said earlier, is that the policy is imperfectly targeted. It does not distinguish between solvent banks and the insolvent banks. So all banks ex ante want to fail exactly at the time of the bailout. Any bank whose assets are performing well at the time of the bailout will not get the benefit of the bailout. So because they all want to get the benefit of the bailout, they all want their assets to fail at the same time. The other way to understand it is, if many banks are doing well when you are performing poorly, you will be sold to those good banks. But if many banks are performing poorly together, then the regulator will be forced to bail out the banks. So you want to perform poorly at a time when others are also performing poorly. And so you make correlated investments ex ante. This is the main result of the paper. So I'll just pause a little bit so that if people have any questions, because I'm on slide number 24 and I have 6 more slides and I have. Are there any question on assumptions or any other questions?
Any questions from the audience?
I have. Is there any scenario that the central bank can act as a lender of last resort here? Because if they cannot see the returns, it means that in any of the cases, it won't be possible for them to act as LOLR.
So as I said, the central bank wants to act as LOLR, but it cannot pick and choose the banks. It can act as LOLR only to the solvent banks. And now when AIG has gone bankrupt, there is a run on all the counterparty banks. So in such a scenario, in such a deep crisis, it's very difficult for the central bank to figure out quickly which bank is exposed how much to AIG and whose assets are performing well and how much AIG is owing to each of the banks and what is going on. In such a deep state of crisis, it's not possible for the central bank to figure out which bank is solvent and which is not. And so it cannot act as LOLR to the solvent banks. And the only option for it is to bail out AIG.
Okay.
Let me see. Himadri Chakravarti has a question again. When you talk about good/bad state, when you talk about good/bad state of industry, does it mean good/bad? Okay. So in my model, the economy consists of the investments made by the banks. So when I'm saying good state, it means the investments made by the banks are performing well. It also means, in the context of the model, it also means that the economy is doing well. So this, you can think of a time when the boom is going on and the real estate sector is performing well. But later it might perform poorly, which is basically the bad state of the economy. Note that these are aggregate states. Within each aggregate state, there's some idiosyncratic risk as well. Finally, Anuj Agarwal has a question. Model basic assumption can coordinate closely to ensure all assets. Yeah, okay. This is a good question. So Anu's question is, how do banks coordinate that all of them are going bad together? They are not coordinating that all of them are going bad together. What they're doing is making investment in the same industry. Now, if the industry goes down, then automatically all of their assets will perform poorly. Now you can ask, how can they coordinate on making investment in the same industry? In the model, it is an assumption, and this simplifying assumption is made by many other papers as well, where you have one short game and all the banks can ex ante coordinate to make investments in the same industry. But typically there can be a case where one bank makes a large investment, and then gradually other banks follow this bank as well. So I mean, usually the herding is gradual. Obviously, in real life, it is not one shot, but this is a modeling simplifying assumption. And there are many other models of herding where you can get gradual herding to the same sector. Prashant Das has a question. In the real scenario, what is the channel for the regulator? What is the channel for regulator to profit from a successful bank buying a failed bank? So one idea could be directly selling the failed bank to the successful banks. And Viral Acharya has many papers which uses this, where the successful banks are forced to pay a price for the continuation value of the failed banks. But there are other mechanisms as well. For example, if a bank is failing, then the regulator may make equity investments in the bank, or it can act as LOLR and buy the assets of a bank at a very cheap price. I mean, there have been many articles which show that during the crisis, although public money was used to bail out the banks, and the regulator acted as lender of last resort as well, with all the QE and everything, they actually made a large profit on these strategies as well. So when TARP was issued and there was capital injection, government made profits on TARP. When the central bank was buying assets from the banks, they were buying at lower than fair prices, because usually that is what happens in an auction. You get a price which is somewhere between very low and the exact price. So you get a price in the middle, and so the banks are able to make a profit even on those long-term investments which they use as collateral to lend to the banks. So I can't pronounce the name of a gentleman. Can you clarify your question? So the question is, can we apply the same logic to assess the country risk? So I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Do you want to repeat the question? You can write it if you can speak out if you want. Okay, there's no response.
Hello.
So, yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, I joined a bit late, but I was going through the I was going through the formula details, whatever was provided. Will the same formula, I mean, will it include all the variations or variables, whatever would impact the country risk when it comes to, I mean, while assessing the risk associated with a bank, can we apply the same scenarios to assess the country risk as well?
So what do you mean by country risk?
I mean, in this case, the bailout would be assessed. I mean, the premium and all those calculations would be done based on the risk exposure a particular bank would have.
Right.
So will the same logic applies to a country risk also? I mean, overall.
So you mean the risk on sovereign debt? Is that what you asked?
Yes.
So sovereign debt is outside the context of the model. I mean, we don't address it. But if you're asking whether countries will coordinate to make investment in the same sector, and there could be a global insurance firm which is insuring countries' investments, I don't know. I mean, that is a little bit of a stretch. So this is mostly in the I would say context of banks making investment in the same sector and then insuring their assets. I'm not sure if this applies to sovereign debt risk.
Oh, okay. No, I assumed like the banks will have a major role in the financials or the GDP performance and all.
Yeah.
So I was under the same assumption, like we can make use of the same calculations or parameters.
Yeah, but so I'm not modeling sovereign default risk here. So I mean, the economy consists there's no sovereign bonds in the model. The economy consists of bank making investments and insuring it with one of the insurance firm. And then we talk about what happens if those investments go bad, and in which case bailout will happen and when will it not happen. So it's hard to speak to sovereign default risk in the context of this model.
Oh, okay. Thanks, sir.
Okay. So Anuj has a question. What is the role of rating agency in this? Do they act as middleware? Yeah, so rating agencies didn't do their job, or they were also unaware of what was going on. I don't know. Again, it is outside the scope of this model. But okay, it's taking a little bit of a practical stance. So I believe that these big investment banks, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, etc., were making investments and were comfortable making the investments in the real estate sector, primarily because they knew that their insurance firm was AIG. Had AIG not been there, or had a systemically important insurance firm would not have been there, they would have been very skeptical to make these investments. I think if that credit default swap market was not that active and particularly supported by a large firm like AIG, I don't think Goldman Sachs would have been, which has the smartest bankers in the world, would have been making such large bets on real estate sector, irrespective of what the rating agencies were saying. I think they were happy to make these investments because they knew that AIG is so big that it just cannot go down. And if AIG is insuring it, no matter what my asset is saying. So I think AIG played a big role in keeping the real estate market going for a long time. And that is what my paper is trying to say, that if there is one big insurance firm writing all these contracts, then the banks would be happy to make correlated investments, because they know that this insurance firm cannot go down. A difference is that in my model, I also show that the systemically important insurance firm itself can arise endogenously, right? And one assumption is that all the banks will herd together to write insurance contract with one insurance firm. Now, what can happen is if there is already a big insurance firm in the market, they can come to that very insurance firm to write there. They can coordinate together to write insurance contracts with that very insurance firm. But more precisely, I mean, again, the rating agency is not there in this model. There is no ratings going on in this model. The information, there is no information asymmetry as such. There is information asymmetry between the regulator and the bank, but the technology is kind of common knowledge. Okay, so Sanket, what was the role of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae? Could they also be considered? Okay, this is a good question, and I have not seen. So Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were buying all the assets, right, from the banks, but so yes, so you can consider them as too big to fail institutions, and one of the reasons why banks were happy to make subprime, do subprime lending was that they knew they could offload the risk to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, right? So, but the bailout of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae was done to support the housing sector, and so that bailout kind of indirectly helped the banks as well, because they had kept a lot on their books as well. It's not that they had offloaded everything off their books. So they were holding a lot of real estate investments on the books as well. Some part they had sold to Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. But I think my model can speak to this Freddie Mac bailout as well. I'll have to think more carefully, and this is a good question. I will try to include a discussion of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae in my paper. Yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, so I'll get to the presentation now. So the next case to analyze was when assets, the banks have made correlated investments and assets. assets are maturing together. So in this case, what I can show is that rho equal to 1, which is correlated investments, cannot be in equilibrium. And the reason is that when the banks have made correlated investments and the assets are maturing together, in either case, either there will be a profit transfer to the regulator or there will be a profit transfer to the insurance firm. And I'm just being a bit quick so that I reach to the more interesting part of the paper, because as I said, this equilibrium will not exist. So to sum up, so far we have shown that when the assets are not maturing together, then the banks will make correlated investments. If the assets are maturing together, then they will make uncorrelated investments. Okay. So what are the policy implications? The policy implication is that if there is a cap on the size of insurance firm, then the problem of systemic risk will go away and the banks will not make correlated investments. Why is that? So suppose banks have made correlated investments and write underpriced insurance contracts. Since there is a size cap on the insurance firm, there will be many insurance firms in the market. Now, in the bad state, what the regulator can do is bail out some of the insurance firm and not the others. So what happens is now, because some of the insurance firms have been bailed out and not the others, the counterparty banks of the bailed out insurance firm can survive. And then the regulator can sell the failed banks to these successful ones. So there is again a scope for targeted policy in this case. And so ex ante, the banks want to survive and buy those failed banks at cheap prices. And so they find it profitable to deviate ex ante and invest in different industry. And also write fairly priced insurance contract. So this is the important policy implication of the paper. So next, let me discuss an extension of the model where I allow the insurance firm to invest in an industry. Now the question is, suppose banks have made correlated investments. Will the insurance firm invest in the same industry or the different industry? And as I have already said, that the banks will invest in the insurance firm will invest in the same industry as the banks. So let me give the intuition for that. So as I said, if the banks have made correlated investments, there are two aggregate states. In the bad state, there will be a bailout of the insurance firm and the insurance firm cannot earn any profit. But in the good state, when there is no bailout, the insurance firm assets can now return R or L because it is not invested in cash. It has also invested in an industry. Its asset can also return R or L. And now I assume L to be greater than 0. Okay. Now, because there is no bailout, the insurance contract is such that the banks are insured even if the insurance firm's assets return low. Okay. So Z is the premium, L is the return, and this is the insurance firm's obligation. So even if the insurance firm's assets are having low return, the banks must be insured in the good state because there is no bailout. This implies that the insurance firms can earn a positive profit when its asset is returning R. So when the insurance firm's asset is giving a high return and the banks are also in the good state, then it can earn a positive profit. So the result is that the insurer wants to maximize the probability that its assets give high return when the banks are also in the good state. And so they make investments in the same industry as the banks. So think about, again, as I had said in the introduction, what would have happened if the real estate sector had performed well? Now, AIG would have made large profits on its real estate investments, and its obligations would also have been very low. So it would have made very, very large profits. If the real estate sector went down, then it would be bailed out, as was the case. So it has an incentive at the cost of the regulator, because if it makes investment in the same sector as the banks, then the expected value of the bailout increases. So at the cost of the regulator, the insurance firm invests in the same industry as the banks and earns a positive profit. So let me conclude with that. So my paper identifies a new channel for the creation of systemic risk. And I show that there is a new externality which is created if there is a too big to fail institution. This externality is that its counterparty may be making correlated investments and creating systemic risk in the ex ante sense. Next, I show why insurance firms might be writing underpriced contracts. I explained why insurance firms may not diversify and invest in the same industry as the banks. And finally, there are policy implications, which is that putting a cap on the size of the insurance firm can prevent the creation of systemic risk. And I thank everyone for their time, and I'll be happy to take the remaining questions. So there's another question. Is the model time on? No, so I do not conduct any simulations in my model. This model is not calibrated. This is a pure theoretic model to explain some of the puzzles of which happened during the financial crisis as to why the banks were making correlated investments and why there was only one big insurance firm which was writing credit default swap contracts, and on top of that, it was not even diversifying its risks. So these are kind of some unexplained facts. And I try to address the broader question of what are the externalities created by a too big to fail institution, but I do not calibrate or simulate the model. Any other questions? Madhuri has a question. Does the model factor the solvency? So the question is, does the model factor the Solvency II reporting, insurers' requirements, and disclosure of risk exposure? So I don't fully understand the question. Madhuri, could you speak up and explain me what is this Solvency II reporting? I'm not aware of this.
Sure. Hi, Kishore. First of all, thanks for presenting the paper to us. So sure. Since 2016, especially in EU, a lot of all insurers are required to report their risk exposure and the capital strength that they have versus the risk that they are undertaking.
So when you're saying risk exposure,
yeah. So the any risk that they are underwriting. So as part of the solvency reporting, they present some scenarios where, let's say, situation A occurs, their risk increases by X percentage, decreases by Y percentage, and they have these capital reserves to meet such requirements, etc., etc. So one of the triggering factors for introducing such regulations, from my understanding, is the experience of AIG and the too big to fail scenarios. So a lot of countries are also implementing a localized version of Solvency II because that only applies to European Union. So I was wondering if that is something that is being considered for this model.
So so I have not considered how will capital regulations affect the outcome, and there can be an exercise which is related to optimal capital requirements for the insurance firm. So your question is very valid in theoretical sense as well. In practically speaking, I think if the regulators are able to better observe the insurance firms, then obviously the likelihood of AIG kind of event happening is lower, and I completely agree with that. That better monitoring by regulators of the insurance firms is always good because they can prevent such insurance firms from happening. But I'll have to think more carefully about how to introduce capital regulations for insurance firms, because there is no capital here in the model so far. But it's a fair theoretical question, and although I have not modeled it so far. Thanks. Sanket, can reforms in banking utilities such as Dodd-Frank Act and stress testing of banks reduce the likelihood of banks? See, stress testing tries to consider scenarios where you see what will happen if certain adverse scenarios play out. So you can say, okay, what happens if the real estate prices go down by 10% or 15%, or if the GDP goes down by 2%, 3%, whatever. So in my sense, if the regulator is alert enough and understands the risk very well, it can raise the capital regulations, raise the capital requirements for the banks, particularly if they're making correlated investments. But it is not easy to design stress scenarios. For example, suppose you are standing in 2007, right? It is very difficult to predict that the real estate market could actually go down by 40%, which happened over the period of 2008, 2009. Now, if the regulators are not able to perfectly predict the stress scenarios, or they are not very conservative, then the banks could still be doing this. And note that because of the presence of insurance firm, your assets are actually already insured. So your capital requirements will not be very high. Your books will look pretty good. And even if you simulate the scenario that real estate prices go down by 40% and the default increases a lot, the banks can always claim that my investments are insured, and so I will not suffer losses. Now it is up to the regulator to figure out that there is only one insurance firm which is insuring all the banks. So yes, if they are able to catch AIG, that it is AIG which will be in real big trouble, and if they can raise capital requirements for AIG, then I think they may be able to solve the problem. I mean, high capital requirements is always good, but banks don't want to raise capital because we know that raising capital is costly. So it's not that easy to check these kind of systemic risk creation through merely capital requirements or stress test. But again, as I said, more monitoring is always better. So yeah. Any further questions?
Yeah, any other questions from the audience? So Kaushalendra, I have one final question. How common is this a developing country phenomenon? I mean, is it only observed in developed markets, or are CDS contracts also used by banks in developing?
So I don't think any of the developing countries have a credit default swap market. So that is why I said in the context of India is probably we are far away from any such problem, and we are only just talking of privatizing LIC, and there is no idea of when a credit insurance market may develop. So obviously most of the developing countries will not face this problem because insurance markets are not there. So although I'm talking about credit insurance contracts, there can be other contracts which can be written in an underpriced way if there is one big firm. Now, how will that manifest? When I'll have to think of how will it manifest in the case of a developing country where the markets are very, very limited and nothing much fancy is going on. But overall, I think the developing countries are immune to such problems.
So there is a question from Prashant.
Yes, I'm
would you like to ask that question?
Oh, thank you. This was a very good presentation. I'm just thinking aloud. So your model shows the problem, but your solution is more exploratory in nature. That leaves room for other possible solutions as well. I'm wondering if capping the size is also something that other researchers have talked about, because there were talks about implementing a too big to fail tax. And do you think that could be a better solution than just capping the size? Because that will penalize these firms. I mean, they'll be penalized for being big.
So I said that we can put a cap. A tax is a more market-oriented way of reducing the size of the insurance firm, right? I mean, putting a tax is equivalent in some sense to putting a cap, because if the firm is very large, the tax will be very large. So in a much more market-oriented way, there will be a cap in the size, cap on the size of the insurance firms or on the size of the banks. Right. So I agree that these other instruments can be used to reduce the size of the systemically important firms, and just capping the size is not the only solution. I mean, putting a tax on size is also perfectly fine.
It's similar. I hear you. Thanks.
Thank you. This was indeed a very interesting presentation. So any other questions, any final questions from the audience before we wind up?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So apart from putting a tax or cap, as I think few geographies are doing, is the close monitoring of these firms by regulatory authority also a possible option?
See, monitoring is always an option, but the problem is the markets are usually always ahead of the regulators, and the traders are always ahead of the regulators, and they know how to game the regulators. So, usually when a financial crisis happens, something new is happening, and it goes unchecked. There can probably be no other person better than Ben Bernanke to be the head of the central bank, who is more trying to monitor the financial system. I mean, he really understood well the Great Depression. He was one of the top researchers. And if you look at his memoir, he will say that they had no clue that in 2006, 2007, that things could get so bad. So yes, monitoring is always an option, but usually the banks and the traders are much ahead of the regulators. And so relying on monitoring might not always be enough. And particularly when what happens is before a crisis, there is this time is different syndrome, right? Something different and new is going on. And even the monitor and the market participants don't know how it will play out. So to just rely on monitoring is probably not enough. And so I'm saying that putting a cap might be a better solution. During these times, what happened? There is literature on the fact that the normal models which predicted defaults of loans had broken down. The banks were trying to use the old models to predict defaults during these times, and these models were not actually performing well. We saw that these models did not perform well, and these models had become outdated because new things was going on in the economy. Now it is really unlikely that if the sophisticated banks are not able to come up with a model to predict defaults, then the monitor will be able to come up with very good models to predict what will happen 2 years hence in the economy. So in some sense, monitoring, as I said, is always good, but it's not perfect. And so you may have to rely on other regulations as well.
Sure, thanks. Just last question. Has any geography or regulatory authority has moved towards either a tax-based or cap-based regulation to control this?
So one kind of tax on banks is capital requirements, right? And we know that capital requirements are different for different sizes of banks. Raising capital is costly. So, and the regulator now requires that large banks have higher capital requirements than smaller banks. So in some way you can say that they are trying to prevent banks from growing too large. And if they are growing too large, then they should have much higher capital. So I would say that is one way of trying to address the problem.
Sure, thanks.
So if there's no other questions from the audience, I would like to thank Kaushalendra for a really interesting presentation and very topical as well. So thank you, Kaushalendra. So a big applause on behalf of the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Saket. Thank you for having me here. And thank you, audience, for patiently listening and for great questions.